Hello, everyone. Welcome to UMD Media's weekly show, the H Panel. The H Panel today will be tackling US lifting human rights violation designation on Ethiopia, how to read it. So we'll be asking for their insight. Our panelists are full house today from last week. I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Bridge, Itan Hapte, and Faisal Robler. Everyone is making this time because we need their insight badly. Otherwise, they are very busy in their own either work, vacation, family life, and so on. So thank you for making this happen again today. Before we go to the topic of the week, what happened from the US government, from the Biden administration, I will start with the usual question. What is the highlight for you in terms of the past 7 days? Duke, you can get us started today.
Sure. Well, two highlights. The first is that the aid suspension is still ongoing on Ethiopia for food. What we're talking about today, and I'll get into it more later, but I just wanted to take a second to talk about what the State Department is doing right now by surrendering on human rights in Ethiopia. It's very important to understand that it's the United States, for whatever our record is or our policies are on human rights, we train people all over the world to promote human rights. We encourage people to put themselves out there and take risks that they may not otherwise take. I mean, we don't pull people off the street to do this. These are already advocates, but we are sometimes the only country that are supporting them from the outside. And when we step back from human rights, when we just sort of abandon our principle on universal human rights, what we do is we put those people at risk in every country. Right now, there are about 600 programs going on by the State Department to promote human rights. The fact that they're not doing that at the senior levels it's abominable. These are teachers, police officers, law enforcement, youth activists from marginalized, persecuted communities. The fact that they now have one less ally in Ethiopia or in any country can look to what's going on and say, the US is not going to be there for us. It's very disturbing to me personally because I've been a part of some of these programs. I've designed some of these programs. I've gotten some of these programs funded, and it makes a liar out of me personally that I would help promote this agenda. It's not unusual to see the US backtrack on human rights. I wish I was more shocked than I am, but every time this happens, I think about the people that we have helped mobilize, train, empower to promote human rights and what this message is being sent to these guys. And it's just, these are some of the bravest men and women in the world who are fighting for human rights in their country. And the fact that we're turning our back on them, any time we turn our back on human rights, we're turning our back on so many people. And it's devastating to me personally. And I'm very surprised that the Secretary of State would encourage the administration to surrender on this. We have a 56-page long country report on Ethiopia that was put out last year by the Department of State, outlining the human rights abuses that are happening right now today in Ethiopia across the entire country, not just Tigray, across the entire country. And just to backtrack on this for geopolitics, it was clumsy. It's an ineffective way to do statecraft, and it's embarrassing personally to me.
Thank you, Duke. Itana, how was the week for you?
Thank you, Getachew. One important point this week for me is a continuation of aid suspension in Tigray. I want to highlight the suspension of aid for Tigray, not simply because aid that was going on for the last few months since the war at least ended on battlefronts since November 2022. But this suspension of aid is having significant impact on human lives daily. As we speak now, people are dying. And some agencies may think they are doing some fair work by suspending the aid because aid was diverted. That was true. The government was involved. There was a very organized governmental work that diverted aid massively. But by the government's admission, at least by Addis Ababa's admission, over 700 people died since the aid was suspended, just in Tigray. I don't think people have an accurate grasp of what the aid suspension is bringing, the amount of damage it is bringing on Tigray. So that is really disappointing, especially in relation to the US aid in the Horn of Africa, particularly for Tigray, since the war on the battlefront ended. We get concerned, and many people reflect on this because US aid, at least formally, has a touch of morality most of the time. But now it seems and it sounds like that sense of morality is subsiding because all of us remember the US government and many governmental institutions in the United States were making public statements concerned for civilians dying because of lack of aid access, okay, to healthcare access. But now the same governmental institutions made a decision in suspending aid. And because of this aid, people are dying daily. That is one concern people may not want to lose sight of. Second, there have been massacres going on in various parts of Oromia this week, and news outlets, especially international news outlets, were not able to grasp that information. It's obvious that war has been going on between Addis Ababa and the OLA forces, but this week, dozens of civilians have been massacred in various parts of Oromia, and which is a highlight of growing state violence against civilians. Just to add one more point beyond Ethiopia, most of us heard that the war in Sudan is not showing a sign of abating. And there is a slighter a victory for RSF forces, and a combination of this developments highlights and gets connected to the United States decision this week of lifting the allegation or the record of Ethiopia associated with human rights violation. And we can make sense of that later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Itana. Faisal, thank you for making this time from the great time you were having with your family. What was the highlight for you this week?
Yeah, I think it was a very busy week, and I will be very brief. June 26th is Northern Somalia's Independence Day, the first time Somali flag was hoisted in the Horn of Africa. A struggle that started in the 1940s. And then June 27th is Djibouti's Independence Day. And then July 1st is Southern Somalia's Independence Day from Italy and the unification of Northern Somalia and Southern Somalia. So it has been a very busy week for Somalis on the Horn of Africa. I think also the other issue that really captured my attention was a little over a week, was the resignation of Turkan Medeksa. I was one of those people who said, in a way, good riddance for her resignation, not because of personal, but because of her sectarian role in the Ethiopian politics. When she turned the application of TPLF to be registered, I was one of the few people who tweeted by saying that she overstepped her mandate, and I indeed believe she overstepped her mandate, because the Pretoria Agreement was comprehensive. It literally trumps everything that was prior to that agreement. And for people to argue and say that the Parliament of Ethiopia should have, been doing this or that, is, saying that whenever there is an agreement between the United States and another country, the president or the Congress should do the detail as opposed to, administrative issue. In my opinion, once the Pretoria Agreement was reached, everything else was administrative to be adjusted to that national safety and public welfare, which is what the Pretoria Agreement was. And I think she, in my opinion, and in many Ethiopians' opinion, she had some grudge that she could not control. And then the last thing that stood out for me was the OLF, over the Oromo Liberation Front, or OLA's latest communique that they released yesterday or today in our time, which basically speaks of their commitment to ensure the self-determination of the people of Oromia, and at the same time somehow suggesting that there is a need for a transitional government between OLA OLF and the existing Oromia government. I don't know if that's snatching out of the comprehensive talks that's between the federal government and OLA, but in any way, it sounded like a more prospective and hopeful kind of communique from OLF. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Faisal, for that. And we'll go to the topic. So this week, the U.S. administration, the Biden administration, as FEP reported, the foreign policy reported, that it quietly, it used that word, I think, which is important, it quietly informed Congress that Ethiopia is no longer engaged in a pattern of, let me just read it directly from that, where it says, it's not engaging in a pattern of gross violation of human rights, and that with that lifts the legal designation that will pave the way to resume the dispatch of U.S. and international economic aid to Ethiopia. And many, including human rights organizations, Amnesty and others, reacted to that, and they are expressing their concerns. So the topic for us, for the panelists, is how should we read that? What is behind this? What is the motive? What's the pull and what's the push factor for the US to do that against all kind of evidences, as FEP also reported, in terms of ongoing violation? Itana, you were speaking to that, what's happening in Oromia. Tigray is the same, with everything under Eritrean occupation in West and Eastern and so on. So let's start with that. Itana, what is your reading of in that FEP report? What's happening?
The US decision is interesting at various levels. First, we are not in the 1990s when the US had a dominant access in the Horn of Africa. Horn of Africa is now a field of competition between the United States and China on one side and Russia on the other side. Second, these three forces are not even the only forces competing for access, resource, and influence in that region. Gulf states, Middle East countries are, over the last few years, having or trying to have military bases all on the coastal regions of the Horn of Africa. The reasons are many, but the most important ones are access to resources, influence over the continent of Africa, especially in relation to the United States. When we look at what the United States decided this week, we need to be aware of all these factors that the US weigh when we talk about human rights violation, human rights record. Human rights organizations are concerned because their primary concern is human rights issues, but it is not the only factor for the United States. The Horn of Africa for the United States is an important region because it is a potential choke point for global trade and its show of naval power, because Horn of Africa, as all of us know, is located between the Sahel and the Red Sea. So this is only one point. The second and most important development in the Horn of Africa, and which is beyond the state of the relation between the state of Ethiopia and the United States, is what is going on in Sudan. Over the last few years, when the transition in Ethiopia staggered and human rights violations significantly deteriorated, the United States tried to establish its foothold in Sudan. Now that potential seems to be challenged seriously. There is no clear power in control of Sudan right now. And it sounds like the United States is looking for a viable ally in the Horn of Africa. And over the last 2 years, the relationship between Addis Ababa and Washington has not been good because of the Tigray war. And United States is now desperate to have somebody. So for the United States, in my view, the word, the statement that you read, there is a key word in there, the pattern. For the United States, the pattern now is less than what was going on during the Tigray war. So it's fair for the United States to improve its relation with Ethiopia because it is desperate. Remember, the United States wants a partner for all of its activities in the Horn, particularly for what? For its global war on terror, for the issues of naval power, as I said earlier, issues of global trade that passes through the Red Sea and connected to the Suez Canal. For all of this, it needs somebody in the Horn of Africa. Eritrea is already bad for the United States. Sudan is staggering. Somalia is Somalia. And it sounds like they are desperate. The United States is desperate. So when we look at these developments, the United States is trying to make Ethiopia back on track of its diplomatic relation. And if we weigh the United States relation with Addis Ababa right now only based on the significant human rights violation in Ethiopia, we will miss a point because the primary concern of the United States is not about human rights in Ethiopia. It's about its strategic and commercial interests in the region.
Faisal, I want you to also look at the same question, but beyond that, this is happening at a time where the no more movement is against the Addis Ababa administration in terms of human rights violation and so on, for whatever motive they have. But this is happening despite that, and also the war going in Amhara region, in Oromia, and so on. So there are people who say, like Itana was alluding to, we shouldn't read too much because this is talking about patterns. So what is your reading of this coming from the US and doing it quietly without making press releases or announcements? And there are sources that say Arakilo heard about this from the news. They were not informed even formally from Addis Ababa. Faisal.
Yeah. Yes. In general, I would agree with Itana's overall analysis of America's realpolitik approach to the Ethiopian situation. And I think the statement said that the pattern seems to be improving, and the causes for imposing restrictions on some issues vis-a-vis human rights issues has improved, i.e. the Tigray war. And I think somebody can read into the statement that the Oromia war, which is still active, has not gotten to the level of Tigray. And I think America is rich when it comes to what was called constructive engagement, which was done during the South Africa, i.e., you see something that's bad, you see something that you don't like, but you still engage the partner. And with all the reasons that Etena listed, from the Red Sea interest and the Gulf of Aden to the Sudan issue, I will not revisit those issues. I think Ali Mazrui once said about the tribe Baganda, which are dominant, that you cannot rule with or without them, with or without the Baganda tribe. I think as far as Africans, particularly in the case of Ethiopia, you cannot live with or without America. On the one hand, there are enough things to criticize America vis-a-vis the Horn of Africa and Ethiopia, and we can list, but at the same time, we are in a situation where either the government or those activists who want to lobby cannot live without America. America's policy toward the Horn of Africa, as Etana outlined, are really determined not by the human rights issue. That's a background issue. That's the fourth, fifth, sixth. The two major criteria under which America evaluates its policy towards Ethiopia, particularly, as one Ethiopian/Ukrainian scholar called it, anchor state, are two. One is business interest. What is U.S. long-term business economic interest in the region? And the second one is security engagement and security interest. And Ten also spoke to those issues, whether it is terrorism, whether it is the Sudan crisis, whether it is the Red Sea, whether it is in the future containing Isaias and doing something about, in addition to the rivalry. Those are primary to the US. There has never been in history at a global level or at the Ethiopian level where the US policy was anchored on the very issue of human rights. We know Palestine, we know what went in Vietnam, we know what went in Africa, we know that the US was the main partner with Zaire under Mobutu, Uganda under Museveni. We can go through the gamut. So those of us who care, in a way, I'm very
I think we lost Faisal. He had, I think, issues of connection outside the boat where he was having fun with his family. Duke, on the same question, and also in terms of how the different parts of the government in the US work. So this is the US Treasury informing, and there was an explanation given today as well in terms of where others stand. And that there are people who are asking, does that mean also the US is saying that no crimes, or the crimes that they said were committed before are, making the Ethiopian leaders not accountable? So what is your reading on that in terms of what people are asking? Duke. You are muted, Duke. Faisal, you are disconnected. I will bring you back to finish your thoughts. Faisal, you may finish your thoughts.
okay. No, I'm finished. So I think the U.S., as you said, and I did catch your last breath on this issue, the U.S. is never absolving Red Kilo, the previous crimes, nor is it looking for the current crimes the other way. I think what it says is that it would like to engage. There are backdoor rumors or conversations that says if the U.S. really stayed and took hard steps against Prime Minister Abiy's government, Ethiopia could bulk, literally collapse. And in some conversations, people are quoting Abiy saying that, but we don't have to really quote anybody. It's very obvious that if America walks away from Ethiopia today, Ethiopia can potentially collapse. So in there have been some signs that I have seen lately where the US is encouraging diaspora gurus to also engage the process, to be participant of the dialogue, to ensure that human rights issues and political uh, space to be expanded is expected and not walk away from the process. And I think that's positive. The only question is what is America going to do about the issues that Etena underlined, the devastating war in Oromia, the situation in Tigray that some people are afraid of sliding back, and if America can engage Ethiopians on those key issues, but at the same time give the current administration of Abiy some space to engage with its adversaries, I think many people will see a better path to be seen.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. Duke?
Yeah. Yeah. What this means for the United States government and what the government's doing. They're not absolving the Ethiopian government of any potential criminal activity or human rights violation, but they haven't been on an official level. The United States government hasn't been very vocal about these crimes against humanity or genocide crimes in the case of Tigray. They've been more vocal than most. I mean, if you compare them to other countries, they've been more vocal, but it doesn't absolve them of anything. It's fairly interesting that they say that they're no longer engaging in a pattern of human rights violations because other than the human rights report and various clip statements, we haven't really had a powerful acknowledgement of the fact that human rights are being violated. But what this was, I just learned when you said that they found out on TV that Biden had done this, and the fact I read that he had done this quietly, and it's a very, very clumsy way of doing things. It reminds me of the bad old days of the global war on terrorism, when we would partner with countries no matter what they were doing to their own civilians, to their own citizens, as long as they played ball, as long as they were on the team. As far as the war on terrorism, it's basically do whatever you want. And we will, I'm sure, continue to advocate for human rights in Ethiopia, but when we remove even these small measures that we've taken to try to hold accountability, it undercuts our ability to do anything on that level. We've done this time and time again. If it wasn't before the global war on terrorism, if you were against the Soviet Union, you could do whatever you want. I mean, before that, we were with Stalin against Nazi Germany. I mean, this is a tradition as old as statescraft, to allow an ally or at least somebody you're trying to court to get away with anything in order to maintain that relationship. Now, that blew up in our face on so many different occasions during the global war on terrorism. We paid dearly for standing by some of these dictators, authoritarian regimes, while they were persecuting their people, when their people just gave up on it. Ethiopia has a history of not tolerating bad rulers for terribly long. I mean, it's foreseeable. The collapse of Ethiopia, I think, without being able to say what's going to happen next. But when you look at the conflicts that are ongoing, when you look at the food insecurity and the threats to food security, I remember last week we were talking about the stability index and what is driving instability. Those are elements that are driving instability. Human rights violations driving instability. But to say that they are no longer engaging in a pattern of human rights violations is completely false. if Biden wanted to come out and say we're going to make an exemption for Ethiopia on AGOA, or if he wanted to come out and say, we're going to step back, but to do this when the ITRI Commission is still wrapping up their investigation, which I guess we're no longer backing the ITRI Commission because we've already decided what the outcome is going to be. If, to do this at a time that we're trying to get the government of Ethiopia to stop stealing the food from starving people so that we can deliver food aid, it undermines every one of our positions. And to do this in such a clumsy way, like on the eve of when they're trying to get into the BRICS bloc, and when they're making more overtures towards China and Russia, if we were going to fold for that reason, why didn't we fold a long time ago? What is it that looks better now, or maybe looks, as the colleagues are saying, things look more dire now in Ethiopia, that perhaps they need this sort of backing from America. I don't understand why we would set ourselves up to have the terms of that relationship completely dictated by the Ethiopian government. It's embarrassing on the part of the State Department. It's a mistake that we make time and time again of not paying close enough attention, or not putting as much energy into trying to do things in East Africa that we should be. And this is a consequence of that. It looks like a confused and muddled policy. I think it looks like a desperate overture by the United States government. I don't see this having a happy ending, because I don't see the policies of the Ethiopian government changing, and that you are going to see more violations of human rights. I expected to see by now that there would be some sort of announcement that there was some sort of quid pro quo when it comes to aid distribution, that we take this off, and then they allow the aid to be distributed. They stay out of the distribution and targeting. But I haven't seen that yet. We should have gotten some sort of concession if we're going to make a blunder of this level, this magnitude. I'm surprised that there's nothing in it for us other than maintaining, a line of communication with the Ethiopian government, that I would imagine this will lead to more demands of the United States in order to keep this relationship ongoing. So I'm not sure exactly what their thinking was on that. I think it was a little bit of a panic is what it looks like. And that seems to be the policy towards Ethiopia, is panic. And that's regrettable when so many lives are on the line.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Duke, for that. Itana, I just want to ask you the question of, given that you follow closely what's happening there, how are people, especially those who are advocating for peace and for end of war in Oromia, in Amhara, everywhere, including Tigray, how are they reading it? How are they reacting to this action or decision from the U.S.? And in your view, how should they treat it? What should be done in terms of people are concerned that, okay, maybe it's not about absolving the government from past violations, but what about, again, putting the ongoing violation under the rug? So there is a big concern. So what should be done, Itana?
Thank you. As you know, the response is one of concern for everyone, but we can make sense of those concerns, although they seem like united upon the United States decision to remove that level of Ethiopia's record. There is a deep division within Ethiopia's communities, even on issues of advocating for human rights abuses in the country. I'll give you a very quick example. During the Tigray war, the community which was organized by Ethiopia's name, or Ethiopian communities, and Amharic-speaking communities in the Western world, were advocating in support of Addis Ababa's war in Tigray, and making a public demonstration against United States government's concern of what was going on in Tigray. You remember the government of United States brought those concerns to the Senate floor and made a public statement that it would make a decision whether or not the United States believes what was going on in Tigray was a genocide or not. And all of a sudden, it was withdrawn. We all remember that position of the United States. I raised this point because those who were opposing the United States for its position on Ethiopia's war in Tigray by then are now pleading for the United States to work against Addis Ababa in what it is doing right now in various parts of the country, in Amhara region and in Oromia in particular. So at some level, there is some sense of lack of logic there, if I may not call it immorality, because for everyone to look at what happened in Tigray and speak against it, it only requires to be human. It requires only to be human, because there was no lack of evidence of what was going on in Tigray. There was ethnic cleansing, a gross destruction of infrastructure, rape, widely recorded by state actors and by invited invaders from Eritrean regime. So it only requires being human to speak against this kind of impunity that was happening in Tigray. So there is some kind of double standard for those who are speaking today against Addis Ababa and in support of Addis Ababa during Tigray war. So in that sense, you can look at some lack of strength in pushing the United States toward this, feasible, workable position that supports protection of human rights. But across the board, like I said earlier, there is considerable concern among those who advocate for protection of human rights in Ethiopia. One important point about this latest position of the United States on Ethiopian regime is that this news, which was published by Foreign Policy, came out the same day when the regime in Addis Ababa made a public statement. Remember, the Washington government did not make public statement about this position, but Addis Ababa made a public statement about a new position. That was its intention to join BRICS. It made a public statement through its foreign office. It declared that it had already submitted an application to join BRICS. The same day this news came out. So this shows how desperate Washington is and how Addis Ababa is going ahead of Washington in order to make it more desperate, to give it some kind of support, supporters that were withdrawn during the war, whatever Addis Ababa wants to do. So today, I won't say the United States is unaware of what is going on in Amhara region. It's deeply concerning in that sense. I won't say Washington is not aware of what is going on in Oromia, and that is concerning. So for us to be able to make sense of what the United States is doing, and in order to put at least some pressure on Washington, there must be a clear position on various points of various positions, especially by people who advocate for human rights in Ethiopia, by especially by those who supported the war on Tigray. There has to be a rectified position, including a public apology to the public in Tigray. This will create a harmonious alliance that would give the support for human rights protection in Ethiopia, or at least those who want to advocate for human rights in Ethiopia, to support one another, to uphold one another, and to speak by one voice to make foreign governments like the United States responsible for what they do. I mean, this is completely far from logic, what the United States lately did. So what the point I want to make is that on one side, there is a united concern on what the United States did, but there is lack of logic there.
Great. Thank you, Chana, for that. Faisal, you are one of these few people who have been writing, reflecting for, since maybe early 90s. And you know the actors on both sides, I must say, in Ethiopia in terms of politics and so on. So what is your reading of how people are reacting to this statement or to this decision from the Biden administration?
Well, in a word, complete resignation. Really, people are dismayed and waking just to smell the coffee. Those of us who really always had harbored some suspicion of lack of commitment on the American side to authentic human rights are not that much surprised. But I think for people who really, especially the diaspora who grew up here, who have put a lot of faith on the lobbying for human rights in Ethiopia, are taken aback, very surprised, very demoralized. Probably they will go around and reorganize. See, America's undermining of the effort of the Ethiopian people to seek democratic governance is not the first time. Actually, the dictatorship that we have in Ethiopia today is partially architected by the US State Department. In 1996, USAID, not anybody else, USAID commissioned America's preeminent political scientist, Samuel Huntington, to go and sit down with Mullis and advise him. That's the same time that Samuel Huntington wrote his book, The Third Wave. And basically, he advised the EPRDF leadership at a gathering to use some of the tactics that he recommended, which is a very sophisticated but highly skilled purge of the opposition groups. And the one-party dominant system that we inherited was the idea, in a way, of Samuel Huntington and the State Department. That little booklet that came out with 40 pages that Samuel put together guided the EPRDF leadership to consolidate power. So America is not our, your prima donna, or if you will, Maria Teresa, when it comes to pumping up autocratic rules. They will do the same thing, as Etena outlined earlier. They will do the same thing if Abiy is ready to be their anchor state, as EPRDF was. There has been tremendous human rights violations and quasi-ethnic cleansing in the Somali region, but America never talked about, simply because the lobbying on the Somali side was weak, and most of the other Ethiopians didn't really care if the Somalis were purged or hit or what have you. Now, people are very much surprised because nobody explained to them that America would just put under the rug the causes and the whys and who killed or caused the death of 1 million people within a short period of time. They did it. The State Department didn't explain that to Ethiopian Americans, whatever wing they belong to, from the far right to the far left. Nobody, as Duke was saying, it's just mysteriously thrown at us and said, take it. This is what we decided. I think America damaged its image on the younger people, on the diaspora, and the people that I talk to don't even think that from now on they would lobby with Americans, because the biggest lobbying that they carried for the last 2.5 years resulted in a one statement that we read, or article that we read from the Foreign Affairs, in a mysterious way. So it's a bad situation, and I think this hurt America's standing among Ethiopians in the Horn of Africa, and that's precisely why opposition groups are not willing, in some instances, to denounce their army struggle with OLA. With OLA, again, if America tries to do the same thing that they did with TPLF, with the Oromo massacre, or even the increasing human violation that's now we are seeing in the Amara region, or even in the capital city, or a soon to be fought over boundaries between ethnic groups, would America do the same thing? There's a dismay among the people that I talk to, and I think there may be some assessment needed. Let me just say one more word about the groups that participated in the genocide along the government side. I don't think those people will ever apologize. The reason why they won't apologize is they just want to bring the same killing machine that Abiy carried, but under their name at this point in time, because the issues that made them side with the government are not being denounced by that group. They still want to carry the same issues, the same denial of rights of people, the same denouncement of the federal structure that gave some nationalities and ethnic groups the rights. And if they get the power, they probably will do the same thing. So how they will come out and denounce what they did and atone of the crimes that they participated, I don't see that yet. I don't know when that will come, but even those who came back, who are now in Washington, D.C. area, the role that they are playing is probably, in my opinion, could be worse than the role Abiy and his team are playing currently in Oromia and Amara region. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Faisal, for that. So we'll go to the last segment of the show, as usual. Final thoughts. So, Duke, start us with parting thoughts for the day from your side.
Yeah, my final thought is about the humanitarian crisis, as my colleague laid out the suffering that's happening right now in Tigray, the suffering that's going to be happening in throughout Ethiopia as a result of the suspension of aid. I mean, there are some areas where food aid is delivered through cash, and I don't think that that's being taken away right now. But this, what we've done, what it really looks like, is that we have turned our back on the people of Ethiopia. And I've said this before, we've turned our back on the people of Ethiopia in order to please the regime of Ethiopia, to take away food aid that at 1.7% of the population was relying on, to take that away, to leave ourselves in a very, very weak position to try to negotiate anything with the Ethiopian government after this recent announcement, to try to get them out of the way so that aid can be delivered. I know that food aid isn't exciting to the people in Washington. It's not even exciting to anybody who doesn't need food aid. They want to see economic aid. They want to see job creation. These things are important. They're necessary. They're, you know, food aid to some extent can be damaging if it's done wrong, but food aid is necessary right now in Tigray. It's necessary in Somali region, in Oromia. It's necessary in Afar and Amhara. It is necessary to continue this food aid so that you can talk about the more important discussions, so that you can do the more important development work, or the more sustainable or enduring long-term stuff. That needs to start with food. It has to happen. They have to turn back on the food aid. If they can't do it for 5.4 million people in Tigray, then they need to do it for the people that they can. And it doesn't seem like we've been having any progress on that. And at the same time, there's absolutely no transparency in this process. What we found out last week is that USAID is horrified. That's great. I'm so glad that we have their emotional response to what's going on. We've heard emotional responses from USAID, from the UN, from everybody who's supposed to be having policy responses, that's supposed to be doing something about this. I don't care how they feel about it at USAID. What I care about is whether or not they are verifying supply routes, they're verifying recipients, they're verifying distribution sites for food. That's what's needed right now. And that we've heard zero about that. The only thing that we get out of that is when stuff is leaked to the media. We don't have any official, they would imagine that there is nobody who is reliant on aid if you take World Food Program or USAID's word for it, because there's been zero official confirmation that things are getting worse, that people are dying. They've been suppressing assessments. They've been not talking about this. It is a terrible situation right now. It is an embarrassing situation, and it is a dangerous situation, because this, what they are accusing people in Ethiopia of doing to divert aid, nobody should be stealing aid. Of course, that is a terrible thing. But if you shine a spotlight on just about any situation where aid is being distributed in large amounts, you are going to find diversion. You're going to find people selling it in the market. There are people who need medicine more than they need aid. They're going to sell, they need medicine more than they need food. They're going to sell the food to get medicine. There are things, there are reasons for this to happen. They need to be more transparent. USAID, World Food Program, the UN needs to be more transparent about what's going on right now to honor the urgency of this situation for the people on the ground who are waiting day after day for food aid to come that is not coming. And that's my final word. Thanks.
Thank you, Duke. That's very important to underline. Itana, what's your, again, parting thought for the day?
Just 2 points. One is about the need of deeper expertise on the side of the United States. The United States, over the last few years, demonstrated enough lack of expertise and deeper body of knowledge that helps it understand and make a good decision for itself and for its partners in Africa, especially in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa region. I am saying so as of the 2018, when a political transition that is now date was triggered in Ethiopia, the United States and many Western world powers could not read what was going on in Ethiopia. It couldn't read. It had enough information, but it could not make sense of it. It could not read it well. And this suggests lack of expertise. It suggests lack of deeper knowledge of making sense of what is going on and trying to, that would help make a very good decision. So the latest decision of the United States is not wise enough. They may think, if you talk to a senior diplomat today in the State Department, they may say they have information, enough information that we may not have. But I would be bold enough to say they lack enough expertise. The latest United States decision is not wise enough. It hasn't been wise over the last few years, and it's not wise now. It sounds to people on the ground like, I don't care if you leave or not. I care about what I care. That is my commerce and global and regional interests. And that doesn't sound good. I think the result it is not yet to be seen, but it is being seen over the last few years in some parts of Africa, particularly in South Africa. Second, the United States can do better and must do better in making decisions, because this is not the 1990s, like I said earlier. It's not the 1990s. Especially the fact that the United States senior diplomats in the embassy in Addis Ababa went to southern Tigray under Amara occupation, and they showed a very bad gesture, much deeper than the United States want to do, because this is immersing the United States in local conflicts. It's not good at all. So the United States can do better and must do better, especially when it comes to recognizing what governments like the regime in Addis Ababa is doing. When you have enough information, you need accurate reading of it. And you want to make a decision that benefits you because you want to benefit yourself and that benefits your partners, not just regimes in the capital cities of Africa, but the people in general. Because the United States usually says we are partnering with the people. You remember about the Tigray war. The United States said when it imposed some minor sanctions, it said we want to partner with the peoples of Ethiopia. We don't want to take a severe measure that damages interests and benefits of the people. Finally, the issue of aid in Tigray is not a card you want to play any further. It's about human life. People are dying daily. World Food Program needs to revise and immediately do so and lift the suspension of aid, not in view of what happened, but in view of people dying daily. Thank you.
Thank you, Itana. Faisal, with final thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'll be quick. I think with the issue of BRICS, it's really an unfortunate situation for Abiy to come and say he's joining BRICS. I looked at some numbers, and probably to India, Ethiopia doesn't export more than 2 million annually. The largest is probably China, which is again very, very small. China, Ethiopia imports through technology or loan, what have you, a lot from China, but what Ethiopia exports to China is again very negligible. What Ethiopia exports to the United States is close to $500 million. What Ethiopia exports to EU is $1.2, $1.5 billion annually. If you really add what Ethiopia sells to the entire Western world, we're talking about $2.5 billion US. If you add to that the remittance that comes from the diaspora to the tune of $3 billion, which doesn't include the Somali money that goes through Ethiopian banks, you're talking about Ethiopia depending on the West in a huge way. What is the replacement? And we're not even talking about food aid and what have you. That alone, I mean, something like this would require feasibility study to give it a rational thinking. So I would just leave it there. It's just not a rational decision making. The other issue is, I think, I totally agree with Etana, and I said so many times, the US lost a lot of expertise in the US State Department, not only now, but since the 1990s. I think Michael Schrader, who was University of Chicago, I believe, presented a paper at the African Studies Association in 1992 in Maryland, if I recall. And exactly he was making that issue that Etana is making. This is about 30 years ago. Today, even worse. On top of that, the East African / Ethiopian intellectuals that America is interacting with has changed, sophisticated, more educated, and more regional as well as national. There are regional issues that America never saw in the past, whether it's the Somali question, the Oromo question, the Tigray question, the Amara question. So they need to recalibrate their approach to the whole Ethiopian situation and political setting so that they can understand and have, as Etana said, a very good view. And lastly, I think America needs, if it wants to understand Ethiopia, the two main issues. One is the state formation that in many of our opinions is incomplete. And that's why federalism was taken, so that you can really control the ethnic issue vis-a-vis the national issue. And the other issue is America will never succeed if it's authentic and true to its values as long as autocratic rulers are nurtured in the whole of Africa and in Ethiopia. The only question is, which we don't have the answer, which we need to work together with the United States State Department and other interested parties and Ethiopian intellectuals and educated people. How can we have a non-autocratic regime in Ethiopia as we go to the 2050, which will probably mark a huge milestone for the Horn of Africa? And unless we do that, I think we are just playing the same game that America has played when Kenya station with its attraction, meaning human devoid strategic interest that the US has at this point in time in the Horn of Africa and Ethiopia, and that has not worked. And I don't think it will work now.
Thank you, Faisal. Thank you, Duke Burbridge, Itana Hapte, and Faisal Robler for your contribution, for your insightful analysis and shedding light on the big ticket items of the Horn this week. And I hope to see you in yet another episode of the H Panel. Good night from here.
Thank you.
Bye. Our viewers, we have been live with the H Panel today, and I want to finish today's episode by announcing another show on Wednesday. On Wednesday, I'll be back with Yosef Gabrahewat. Yosef is one of the organizing committee members on a symposium that will be held July 14th to 16th, a 3 days symposium in Washington, D.C. Why do we need regime change in Eritrea now? So this is an Eritrean organization called FALSI, Seedling for Peace and Democracy in Eritrea, SPDE, and it's organizing a 3-day symposium. Why do we need regime change in Eritrea now? And a number of topics will be covered. I'll be speaking with Yosef Gabrahewat at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on July 5th, Wednesday. So tune in to UMD Media Live with Yosef Gabrahewat. Just to give you a highlight of this symposium, there will be a number of topics to be covered. A number of them, like at least 30 different topics, from the nature of the Asmara regime to Eritrea voting with its feet. This is about the mass exodus and so on. The state of Eritrean refugees everywhere, that will be a subject matter there. The incarceration state, genocide in Eritrea, and indefinite national service, all that including the economy, the anti-institutional nature of the regime, and so on. So a number of topics will be covered, including Eritrea's role in Tigray genocide. A number of presenters will be there, including our panelists. Duke will be presenting there, among others. Faisal will be representing, and a number of people. And we'll be talking about that with Yosef Gabrahewat, who is one of the organizers of that important symposium, July 14th to 16th, 2023. Why do we need regime change in Eritrea? There are a number of speakers who know the subject matter they will be presenting in terms of research, in terms of experience, in terms of lived experience as well. So tune in to UMD Media. I will have this English show with Yosef Gabrahewat on Wednesday, July 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That was the show for today. Good night from here. And those who are following us from the Horn of Africa under HBS, we have recently changed the frequency, and we'll be announcing that. If you haven't noticed that already, there was a transition period over the past week. So tune into HBS Horn Broadcasting Services to watch H Panel and other shows from UMD Media. Your host was Gita Josefa. Good night from here. Bye.